Captain Jake Morrison walked into the huge council chamber and felt the weight of 47 alien species staring at him. The room was bigger than any human building he had ever seen, with walls that stretched up so high they disappeared into shadows. Each alien delegate sat in their own special chair designed for their weird bodies. Some had tentacles that moved like angry snakes, while others looked like walking crystals that changed colors when they got mad. Jake wore his best military uniform, but he felt small in this place. Behind him stood Commander Lisa Brooks and Chief Engineer Don Carter. All three humans looked tired because they had been fighting the same battle for 3 years. The aliens never listened, and they never cared about what humans wanted. Today was supposed to be different, but Jake already knew it would be just like all the other meetings. The issue was simple enough that even a child could understand it. 6 months ago, the Galactic Council had promised humans the mining rights to the Kepler 442 system. The paperwork was signed and the deal was done. But then the Council kept finding new reasons to delay everything. First, they needed more environmental studies. Then they wanted cultural impact reports. After that came the economic assessments. That took months to complete. Meanwhile, alien corporations were moving into the system and taking the resources that belonged to humans. The Council said nothing about this. They just kept asking for more papers and more meetings and more delays. Jake had spent half his life in the military, and he knew a stall tactic when he saw one. The aliens never planned to give humans those mining rights. They just wanted to keep humans busy while their own people took everything valuable. The Altherian Prime Minister stood up on his 4 legs and waved his 4 arms in the air. His voice sounded like a machine when he spoke. The human delegation does not understand how delicate our system is. Your species moves too fast and wants too much. You need to learn patience if you want to be part of our galactic community. Jake felt his hands turn into fists, but he kept them at his sides. Around the room he could see 46 other alien species nodding their heads in agreement. They all thought the same thing about humans. Too young, too stupid, too primitive to understand how the galaxy really worked. They had been saying this for 3 years, and Jake was sick of hearing it. "We have been patient," Jake said in a voice that stayed calm even though anger was burning in his chest. "We have filled out every form you gave us. We have attended every meeting you called. We have followed every single rule in your book. But here we are again watching you give our resources to alien companies while you tell us to wait some more." The Vorthek delegate made a sound like breaking glass, which Jake had learned meant they were laughing at him. The crystal alien surface turned bright red with amusement. "Maybe if your species had evolved beyond such simple ideas like owning things and competing with each other, you would understand our way of sharing resources fairly among all species." That was the moment Jake Morrison decided he was done with this whole system. He had been a soldier for 20 years, and he knew when a fight was not worth fighting. The aliens had made up their minds about humans before the first human ship ever reached their space. Nothing humans did would ever change that. They could be perfect citizens for 100 years, and the aliens would still find reasons to treat them like children. Jake looked around the room at all the alien faces staring at him. Some looked bored, like this was just another boring meeting. Others looked annoyed that humans were wasting their time again. A few looked almost happy, like they enjoyed watching humans get frustrated and angry. None of them looked like they cared about fairness or justice or keeping their promises. "You know what?" Jake said, and his voice got louder than he meant it to. "You can keep your council and your committees and your endless meetings. Humans are done playing this game." The room went completely quiet. Even the aliens who were always making noise stopped moving. Jake could hear his own heartbeat in his ears as he realized what he had just said. But he did not take it back because he meant every word. Lisa Brooks stepped forward, and Jake could see she was thinking the same thing he was. They had wasted 3 years of their lives trying to make this work. 3 years of being talked down to and dismissed and ignored. 3 years of watching alien species get everything they wanted while humans got nothing but more paperwork to fill out. "Captain Morrison speaks for all of us," Lisa said, and her voice carried the authority of someone who had commanded starships in battle. Humanity withdraws from the Galactic Council effective immediately. The aliens started making all kinds of noise then. Some were angry, and some were confused, and some seemed to think this was all a big joke. The Zilarian ambassador's tentacles were moving so fast they looked like they were having a seizure. The Corlin delegates started making clicking sounds that meant they were very upset, but Jake did not care what any of them thought anymore. He turned around and walked toward the exit with Lisa and Dan right behind him. His boots made loud sounds on the marble floor, and each step felt like he was walking away from the biggest mistake of his life, the Altherian Prime. Minister called out behind them, "You cannot just leave. There are procedures to follow." "There are forms to file? You cannot make such a decision without proper authorization." Jake stopped at the door and turned around one last time. "We just did," he said, and then he walked out of the chamber and left the Galactic Council behind forever, as the three humans made their way back to their shuttle. Jake felt something he had not felt in years. He felt free. For the first time since joining the galactic community, humans were going to do what they wanted instead of what the aliens told them to do. It was going to be interesting to see how well the aliens did without human help. The shuttle lifted off and headed back to the human station in orbit. Jake looked out the window at the massive alien structures below and wondered if he would ever see them again. Probably not, and that was just fine with him. Humans had gotten along without aliens for thousands of years. They could do it again. Ambassador Helen Price sat in her office 3 days after Jake Morrison walked out of the council chamber and watched the news feeds from Earth on her big screen. The vote had been fast and clear. Every single human colony and every single human world had voted the same way. Not one person voted against leaving the Galactic Council. The final count was so one-sided that Helen almost felt sorry for the aliens who thought humans would change their minds. The Human Colonial Assembly had met for only 2 hours before making their decision. President Kevin Walsh had asked one simple question, and everyone knew the answer before he finished speaking. Should humanity withdraw from the Galactic Council and end all diplomatic relations with the alien species who had treated them like children for 3 years? The response came back so fast it surprised even Helen. Yes from Earth, yes from Mars, yes from the colonies around Alpha Centauri, yes from the mining stations in the asteroid belt, yes from the research outposts on the edge of human space. Every single human settlement voted to leave the council and never look back. Helen had been packing her office for 2 days now. 20 years of diplomatic work was going into boxes that would be shipped back to Earth. The huge human embassy that had taken 2 years to build was being torn down piece by piece. Every human diplomat and every human worker was being called home. The aliens were about to find out what it felt like to run their council without human help. "Ma'am," called Lieutenant Ben Hughes from the outer office, "we have 12 different alien species trying to contact you. They all say it is urgent and they need to speak with you right away." Helen smiled, but it was not a happy smile. "Tell them I'm busy packing. They had 3 years to talk to us when we wanted to talk to them. Now they can wait their turn." The truth was that Helen did not want to talk to any of them. She had spent 3 years trying to make friends with aliens who thought humans were too stupid to understand how their perfect system worked. She had attended their parties and learned their customs and tried to find common ground with species that had nothing in common with humans. All of that work had been wasted because the aliens never saw humans as equals, but the real shock was going to come when the aliens realized how much they needed human help. Helen had been watching the economic reports for months, and she knew something the aliens did not know. Human businesses and human workers had become a huge part of the galactic economy. When all those humans went home, the aliens were going to have some very big problems. Dr. Susan Martinez was finishing her last surgery on the Corlin homeworld when the evacuation order came through her communication device. The Corlin patient on her table was a young female who would have died without human medical knowledge. The aliens had been debating for 6 months whether to officially recognize human medical degrees, even though human doctors had saved thousands of alien lives. Susan looked at the other human doctors in the operating room and saw the same tired expression on all their faces. They had worked 18-hour days for 2 years trying to help the Corlin people. They had reduced the alien death rate by more than half and saved children, who would have died from diseases that humans had cured decades ago. But the Corlin government still would not admit that human medicine was as good as alien medicine. "Pack everything," Susan told her medical team. "We are going home and we are not coming back." The Corlin medical officials, who had been arguing about human qualifications for months, were about to find out what their hospitals looked like without human doctors. Susan did not feel good about leaving sick patients behind, but she also did not feel bad about it. The aliens had made their choice, and now they would live with that choice cost them economic. Attached Ryan Phillips was looking at numbers that would have scared him if he was an alien leader. Human companies had quietly become essential to dozens of alien worlds. The rare earth mining operation on Vega Prime employed 15,000 aliens and supplied materials that were used in everything from starship engines to medical equipment. When that operation shut down next week, the aliens would have to find new jobs and new suppliers. The manufacturing complex on Proxima Station was even more important. 40,000 aliens worked there, making products that were sold throughout Council space. The factory used human technology and human methods that were twice as efficient as anything the aliens had developed on their own. When the humans took their technology home, the aliens would have to figure out how to make the same products with their old slow methods. "The supply chains are going to break down completely," Ryan told the emergency meeting of Human Economic Advisors. "We supply critical materials to 17 different star systems. We employ over 200,000 aliens across 6 different worlds. When we shut down, all of that goes away." Helen nodded as she listened to the reports. The aliens had spent 3 years telling humans that they were not important enough to have a real voice in council decisions. Now they were about to learn just how important human work had become to their daily lives. The communication requests kept coming in. The Altarian Trade Minister wanted to discuss emergency supply agreements. The Vorthek Industrial Council was asking about temporary extensions for human-run factories. The Zilarian Agriculture Department needed to know if human farming experts would stay until the harvest was complete. Helen had the same answer for all of them. No, humans were done helping aliens who did not respect them. Every human business was closing. Every human worker was going home. Every human expert was being reassigned to human projects. The aliens who had spent 3 years taking human help for granted were about to find out what life looked like without it. The most important thing the aliens would lose was military technology. Humans had never asked for positions in the Council military, but their defensive systems protected dozens of alien worlds. The automated defense platforms that kept pirates away from the outer colonies were human-designed and human-built. The communication networks that connected faraway worlds were human-engineered and human-maintained. Admiral Frank Johnson had been the human military liaison to the Council for 2 years. He was already 3-star jumps away from Council space when the emergency evacuation order came through. His personal log showed that he was not surprised by what was happening to the aliens. "They treated us like we were junior partners in our own galaxy," he had written. "Now they are going to learn what happens when the junior partners decide to find better partners." Helen finished packing her last box and looked around her empty office. Tomorrow she would be on a ship heading back to Earth. The aliens could keep their council and their committees and their endless meetings. Humans had work to do, and they were going to do it without alien permission. Council Speaker Zexthel stared at the emergency reports covering his desk and felt his 4 eyes burning from lack of sleep. 2 weeks had passed since the humans walked out of the council chamber, and the galaxy was falling apart. The other council members had called the human withdrawal a childish tantrum that would be forgotten in a month. Now those same aliens were sending panic messages every hour asking what the council planned to do about the crisis. The first report came from the Altarian manufacturing sector. The aliens who had spent months calling humans arrogant and primitive were now begging for emergency economic aid. Their primary supplier of industrial catalysts had been the human operation on Vega Prime, Without those materials, their entire manufacturing system was shutting down. Millions of aliens were losing their jobs, and the Altarian government was threatening to withdraw from the council if help did not arrive soon. Zexthel remembered the Altarian delegate laughing at human requests for fair treatment just 3 weeks ago. The same alien who had said humans were too young to understand galactic economics was now demanding that the council fix the economic disaster his world was facing. The irony would have been funny if the situation was not so serious. The Corlin medical emergency was dominating every newsfeed in council space. Without human doctors and their advanced medical knowledge, the alien hospital system was completely overwhelmed. The Corlin had spent 6 months debating whether human medical degrees were valid, while human doctors worked around the clock saving alien lives. Now those doctors were gone and aliens were dying from diseases that humans could have cured easily. Dr. Susan Martinez had been treating over 200 patients when the evacuation order came through. The Corlin medical officials had finally decided to recognize human medical credentials just 1 day after the human doctors left their world. The timing was so bad that even Zexthel felt sorry for the sick aliens who were suffering because their government had been too proud to admit that human medicine worked better than their own. The Corlin prime minister, who had publicly criticized human medical arrogance for months, was now sending desperate messages to Earth begging for human medical teams to return. His own daughter was sick with a condition that only human doctors knew how to treat. The aliens who had questioned human medical knowledge were now watching their children die because of their own stubborn pride, but the military implications were what really terrified Zexthel and the other council leaders. The humans had never asked for military positions in the council structure, but their defensive technology had quietly become essential to the security of dozens of worlds. The automated defense platforms that protected the outer territories were human-designed and human-built. Without human technicians to maintain them, the systems were failing one by one. "Sir," his aide whispered in a voice that shook with fear, "we are getting reports of pirate attacks in the Outer Rim. The automated defense systems are not working. The human technicians who knew how to fix them are gone." Zexthel felt his blood turn cold. The Outer Rim had been peaceful for 30 years because of those defense systems. The pirate clans that had terrorized the galaxy for centuries had been kept away by human technology. Now that technology was failing and the raiders were coming back, like hungry wolves smelling weak prey. The communication networks that connected the faraway worlds were also starting to fail. Human engineers had designed systems that were more reliable and more efficient than anything the aliens had built on their own. When those engineers went home, they took their knowledge with them. Now, worlds that had been in constant contact for decades were losing touch with each other. Admiral Frank Johnson had been 3 jump points away from council space when the first pirate attack happened. His personal log showed that he had expected this to happen but had been ignored when he warned council leaders about their dependence on human technology. The aliens had been so focused on keeping humans in junior positions that they had not noticed how much they needed human expertise. The economic numbers were getting worse every day. Human businesses had employed over 300,000 aliens across 24 worlds. Those jobs were gone and unemployment was spreading through council space like a disease. The aliens who had jobs were discovering that their companies could not function without human suppliers and human technology. The rare Earth mining operation on Vega Prime had supplied materials that were used in everything from medical equipment to starship engines. When the humans shut down that operation, the aliens had to find new suppliers, who charged twice as much for materials that were half as good. The cost of everything from transportation to healthcare was going up because humans were no longer there to provide cheap, efficient alternatives. The manufacturing complex on Proxima Station had been the most efficient factory in council space. Human methods and human technology had allowed them to produce goods faster and cheaper than any alien operation. When the humans took their technology home, the aliens were left with old, slow methods that produced expensive products that nobody wanted to buy. Zexthel realized that the humans had not just been workers and advisors in the galactic economy. They had been the foundation that everything else was built on. The aliens had been so busy looking down on humans that they had not noticed how Much their own success depended on human innovation and human efficiency. The emergency session of the council was scheduled for tomorrow, but Zexthel already knew what would happen. The same aliens who had voted against every human proposal for 3 years would now demand that the council do something to bring the humans back. They would offer apologies and concessions and promises that things would be different if humans would just return to fix the problems they had created. But Zexthel had been trying to contact the human government for 2 weeks without success. President Walsh was always in meetings. Secretary Coleman was always traveling. Even the human trade representatives had become mysteriously unavailable. The humans were not just refusing to help fix the crisis, they were refusing to even talk about it. The truth was becoming clear to anyone who wanted to see it. The humans were not coming back. They had spent 3 years being treated like children, and now they were done with the Galactic Council forever. The aliens who had dismissed human concerns as unimportant were now facing the consequences of their own arrogance. 3 more worlds had requested emergency aid just today. The defense system failures had resulted in successful pirate raids on 5 different colonies. The medical crisis on Corlin had spread to 3 other worlds that depended on human-trained doctors. The economic collapse was getting worse every day as more human operations shut down. Zexthel looked at his reflection in the dark window of his office and saw an alien who had helped create the biggest diplomatic disaster in galactic history. The humans had not destroyed the council through war or sabotage. They had simply walked away and let the aliens discover how much they needed human help to keep their civilization running. The emergency session of the Galactic Council looked nothing like the calm, dignified meetings that had been held for 1,000 years. The elegant chamber that usually buzzed with polite diplomatic conversation was now filled with panic and desperation. Representatives who had spent years dismissing human concerns were now facing the complete collapse of the systems they had taken for granted. Council. Speaker Zexthel called the meeting to order, but his voice shook as he spoke. Around the great circular chamber, 47 alien species sat in their specially designed chairs, looking more frightened than he had ever seen them. The Vorthak delegate who had laughed at human ownership concepts just weeks ago was now flickering between colors so fast that other aliens were getting dizzy watching him. "We must establish immediate communication with the human leadership," demanded the Vorthak representative in a voice that sounded like breaking crystal. "The economic disruption is spreading to our core systems. Our people are asking questions. We cannot answer." The Altherian Prime Minister stood on his forelegs and waved his forearms in agreement. This was the same alien who had told humans they moved too fast and wanted too much. Now he was begging for human help as fast as he could get it. The manufacturing sector collapse has reached 17 systems. Unemployment is at levels we have not seen in 3 centuries. We need human expertise to restart our production lines. Zexthel had been trying to reach Earth for 3 weeks without success. Every communication request was met with the same polite response from human officials. President Walsh was in meetings. Secretary Coleman was traveling. The human trade representatives were unavailable. Even the low-level clerks who used to answer alien calls were suddenly too busy to talk. The truth was that humanity was simply ignoring the council completely. Every message was being acknowledged and filed away without response. The humans were not even pretending to care about the crisis they had left behind. They were too busy establishing new relationships with the independent worlds that had been pushed aside by council policies. The Corlin delegate made clicking sounds that meant extreme distress as he spoke about the medical emergency on his world. 12,000 of our people have died in the past month. The diseases that human doctors treated easily are spreading through our population. Our own medical professionals cannot handle conditions that humans solved routinely. The irony was not lost on anyone in the chamber. The Corlin had spent 6 months debating whether to recognize human medical credentials, while human doctors worked around the clock saving alien lives. Now those doctors were gone and the Corlin were dying from their own bureaucratic delays. "Perhaps," suggested the Altherian Prime Minister in a voice that had lost all its usual arrogance, "we should consider sending a formal apology to the human government for any misunderstandings about their concerns. The suggestion was met with uncomfortable silence. The Galactic Council had never apologized to anyone in its 1,000-year history. The idea of admitting they were wrong about anything went against everything the Council represented. But the alternative was watching their civilization collapse while humans built something better without them. The Zilarian ambassador's tentacles writhed nervously as he spoke. My government has authorized me to offer the humans permanent seats on the ruling committee, full voting rights and veto power over any decisions that affect human interests. This was the same government that had argued for months that humans were too young to understand galactic politics. Now they were offering to give humans the kind of power they had refused to consider just weeks ago. The desperation in the chamber was so thick that even the air recycling system seemed to be struggling. Meanwhile, the situation outside the council chamber was getting worse every day. The defense system failures had resulted in 8 successful pirate raids, with more being reported hourly. The Outer Rim colonies that had been safe for decades were now under constant threat from raiders who knew the automated defenses were failing. Captain Claire Murphy had been serving with the Council security forces for 5 years when the human withdrawal began. She was now 3 sectors away, helping to establish humanity's new independent defense network. Her former alien colleagues were sending increasingly desperate messages asking for her return, but she had her orders from Earth. The Council had 47 different species, Claire told her staff during their daily briefing. 46 of them voted against every human proposal for 3 years. Now they want us to forget all of that and come back to fix their problems. The human response to alien desperation was consistent across all levels of government. Thanks for the offer, but we are not interested. Humanity had found new trading partners among the independent worlds. They had established new defense agreements with species that had been marginalized by council policies. They had created new medical programs with aliens who actually appreciated human expertise. The economic data was becoming impossible to ignore. Human businesses had not just employed hundreds of thousands of aliens, they had been the foundation of technological progress throughout council space. Human innovation had driven improvements in manufacturing efficiency, transportation speed, and medical effectiveness. Without human creativity and human problem-solving, the alien civilizations were stagnating. The communication networks that connected distant worlds were failing faster than alien technicians could repair them. Human engineers had designed systems that were self-repairing and self-improving. When those engineers went home, they took their knowledge with them. Now the aliens were discovering that their own technology was decades behind human innovation. The manufacturing collapse was spreading to new systems every day. The humans had not just run factories, they had created entirely new ways of making things. Their methods were faster, cleaner, and more efficient than anything the aliens had developed. Without human guidance, the alien factories were producing expensive products that broke down quickly. The medical crisis on Corlin had spread to 6 other worlds that depended on human-trained doctors. The aliens were rediscovering diseases that humans had eliminated from their own populations centuries ago. Children were dying from conditions that human medical knowledge could have prevented easily. The Vorthek delegate's crystal surface was now flashing emergency red as he spoke about the industrial collapse on his homeworld. Our people are asking why we dismissed human methods for so long. They want to know why we are not capable of solving problems that humans handled routinely. Zexthel looked around the chamber at representatives who had lost all their diplomatic composure. These were the same aliens who had spent 3 years explaining to humans why they were too primitive to understand galactic civilization. Now they were begging for human help while their own civilization fell apart. The final insult came when the first council member species applied for membership in the new alliance that humans were building with independent worlds. The Corlin were so desperate for human medical aid that they were willing to abandon the council that had ruled their lives for centuries. The message was becoming clear to everyone in the chamber. The humans were not coming back to save the council from the consequences of their own arrogance. Sometimes the most powerful diplomatic weapon was the simple act of walking away from a system that did not work. 6 months after Captain Jake Morrison walked out of the Galactic Council chamber, the galaxy had changed in ways that nobody could have predicted. The mighty council that had ruled space for 1,000 years was now a shadow of its former self. 12 star systems had left the council completely, and most of them had joined the new alliance that humans were building with independent worlds. President Kevin Walsh stood in the newly built human colonial headquarters on the independent world of New Geneva and looked out at representatives from 37 different species. These were not the arrogant council members who had dismissed human concerns for 3 years. These were aliens who had been pushed aside by council politics and were eager to work with anyone who treated them fairly. The Colonial Alliance operates on simple principles, Walsh announced to the assembled delegates. Every species gets an equal voice in our decisions, no matter how old they are or what technology they have. We believe that good ideas can come from anyone, and we are willing to listen to everyone. The room erupted in approval from species that had never been allowed to speak in council meetings. The Breni were a young civilization that the council had ignored for decades. The Iril were an old species that had been marginalized because their technology was different from council standards. The Fokin were former council members, who had left in disgust after watching the human withdrawal. The irony was not lost on anyone present. The species that the council had dismissed as too young and primitive to understand, galactic politics had created a more stable and successful alliance in 6 months than the council had managed in centuries. The Colonial Alliance was growing every week as more species applied for membership. Engineer Tony Parker, who had spent years being dismissed by council bureaucrats, now oversaw the construction of humanity's new industrial base. Free from council regulations and politics, human innovation was exploding across the independent systems. New technologies were being developed at a speed that amazed even the humans themselves. When you do not have to ask permission from 47 different committees before trying something new, you can get a lot more work done, Tony told his engineering team during their weekly meeting. We have made more progress in 6 months than we made in 3 years under council oversight. The human medical programs were saving lives throughout the Alliance. Dr. Susan Martinez, who had left the Corlin world to die from diseases she could have cured, was now training alien doctors in new techniques that were spreading hope through dozens of systems. The Alliance Medical Corps was smaller than the council system, but it was more effective because decisions were made by doctors instead of politicians. We are not trying to replace the Galactic Council, explained Secretary Nancy Coleman during a rare interview with Galactic Media. We are just showing that their way was not the only way. When you treat people as partners instead of junior members, they tend to be more creative and productive. The economic success of the Colonial Alliance was embarrassing the Council every day. Trade between Alliance worlds was growing faster than anyone had expected. The efficiency improvements that humans brought to alien industries were creating prosperity that Council worlds could only dream about. Alliance worlds were becoming destinations that young aliens wanted to move to. The most successful Alliance projects were the ones that combined human innovation with alien knowledge. The Iril had developed energy storage techniques that humans had never seen. When human engineers worked with Iril scientists, they created power systems that were revolutionary. The Breni had agricultural methods that could feed twice as many people on the same amount of land. Human farmers working with Breni experts were ending hunger on worlds that had struggled for generations. The Council's attempts to win back human cooperation had become increasingly desperate and increasingly humiliating. They had offered trade concessions that would have made humans rich. They had promised technology exchanges that would have advanced human science by decades. They had even offered permanent seats on the ruling committee with veto, power over council decisions, but humanity's response had been the same every time. Thanks, but no thanks. We are busy building something better. The humans were not interested in joining a system that had treated them badly. They were creating a new system that worked better for everyone involved. The final humiliation came when council member species began applying for membership in the Colonial Alliance. The Corlin were the first to abandon the council that had ruled their lives for centuries. They were followed by the Altarians and then by a dozen other species that had suffered from council bureaucracy. We spent 3 years being told that we did not understand galactic politics, wrote Dr. Martinez in her memoirs years later. It turned out that we understood something the aliens had forgotten. We understood how to create systems that actually help people instead of just making politicians feel important. The Galactic Council still existed, but it was a joke that nobody took seriously anymore. The economic collapse had reduced their territory to less than half of what it had been. The military failures had made them irrelevant in galactic security. The medical disasters had shown that their healthcare system was inferior to what the Alliance provided. Commander Lisa Brooks, who had stood behind Jake Morrison during his historic walkout, was now serving as Alliance Defense Coordinator. Her ships protected more worlds than the Council fleet, and they did it more effectively because they were not bound by committee decisions and political compromises. Sometimes the best way to win a fight is to refuse to play by rules that were designed to make you lose, Lisa said in her final report on the Alliance military. We did not reject diplomacy. We rejected their version of diplomacy that was never fair to begin with. The galaxy was a different place now, and humanity had proven that the most powerful statement any species could make was a simple word: no. No to unfair treatment. No to bureaucratic delays. No to being treated like children by aliens who needed human help more than humans needed alien approval. Captain Jake Morrison, who had started it all, was now serving as Alliance Chief of Staff, coordinating the activities of 43 different species across 67 star systems. Sometimes he looked back at that day in the council chamber and wondered what would have happened if he had not walked out. The answer was obvious to anyone who looked at the success of the Colonial Alliance compared to the failure of the Galactic Council. Sometimes walking away from a bad situation was not giving up. Sometimes it was the first step toward building something better. The humans had not destroyed galactic civilization through war or conquest. They had simply refused to accept second-class treatment and invited everyone else to join them in creating something fairer. The aliens who wanted to learn from human methods were welcomed as equals. The aliens who preferred their old ways were left alone to suffer the consequences of their choices. The galaxy was bigger now, with more opportunities for everyone who was willing to work together as partners instead of rulers and subjects. Humanity had shown that sometimes the best diplomatic strategy was knowing when to say no to a bad deal and yes to building something new.